What's up, guys? This is the Cow Stars podcast. I wanted to give a quick intro to this episode before we got started, because there are a lot of people who have come through, both come through the podcast and, friends, family, etc., who may look at an episode like this and say, oh, fuck this. I'm not going to listen to this. Fuck this atheist, whatever. But I really encourage anyone who, wants to hear an open-minded conversation to listen to this episode. There are a lot of points in this episode where we actually disagree, despite the fact that we're both atheists. And, one of the tenets of this show is open-minded and free-thinking conversation. That's a hill I will die on. So, anyone, despite their religious or political affiliations, I think is very important for anyone to listen to this episode. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. Without further ado, here are the sponsors. Guys, our first sponsor, you know them, you love them, Guerrilla Graphics Design Agency. I don't even really need to say this because you guys are probably so familiar at this point, but they can provide you with top-tier effects and production value. They have everything you can ask for, including professional equipment and a stellar end product from top to bottom. The CEO, Jaden Swales, we've had him on the podcast numerous times. He's both funny and energetic, and he also just has a keen eye for, creating a piece of media. And I support him 100%. So head over to GuerrillaGraphics.com for all of your design needs today. That's GUERRILLA GRFX.com. Guys, are you trying to find your next spot for a show or event? Well, look no further, because Starbox Productions is here to help. If you're looking for a solid team of people to get you started with your next performance or event, this is the company to contact. They're always busy and in motion behind the scenes in the Midwest and have plenty of shows lined up. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Starbox Productions' Facebook page for all of your needs today. Guys, before we mention our last sponsor, let me ask you a question. Are you a rock band or solo musician looking for representation and a way to secure shows? Well, our newest sponsor, Cranial Nerve Records, can help. This organization has been fundamental in securing live shows for the podcast, and we cannot be more grateful to them. Reach out to them for bookings via email at cranialnerverecords@gmail.com. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Cow Stars podcast. I'm your host, as always, Cole McAllister. Very special guest today. We're joined by Jason Benell, who is the press officer for the Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers organization. I've known about your organization for about probably 5-6 years now. I've never gotten around to actually coming through on what you guys do, but I've always kind of been looking from a distance. And I appreciate what you do. How you doing today, man?
I'm all right. We could have better weather, but
yeah, right.
We'll survive.
Yeah. Well, you're in the thick of it, right? In the winter of Iowa. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those people who will constantly comment on the weather, and people are just like, "Shut the fuck up." I'm like, "Fuck you! It's snowing out."
It's not. It's as if you're not the only one experiencing it. They saw it too, but it's part of your day. It's part of your day.
I guess that is the comforting part of it, right? Is that everyone's suffering.
It rains on everybody.
Yeah, unless you're insane. Well, then. If you like this shit, then I'm glad for you, buddy.
If you like this stuff, go to Seattle or something. I don't know. This isn't great.
Very good point. Very good point. So, Jason, so like I said, you're the... Excuse me. I've been dealing with this fucking hacking, so I apologize for that in advance. Not sick or anything, as far as I know. But so, like I said, you're the press officer for the Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers organization. Let me ask you just first, why are you an atheist?
Well, there's no compelling evidence that there is a God that exists. So by the default position is not to take one. So
okay,
I'm an atheist. Yeah.
Cool. I guess, do you have any kind of experiences? Like, did you have any kind of religious upbringing, anything like that?
No. I surprisingly, a lot of folks are surprised to hear that. No. Religion wasn't part of our life growing up. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was just something other people did. My first experiences with religion was probably when I went into basic training. To give you an idea of, I went to my almost...
so you're military.
Yeah. Formal.
Awesome.
But really that was, I would say, my first real organized attendance of a religious activity was when I was 17. So no, I wasn't raised religious, and then it's like something happened and now I'm rebelling against my parents. No, it's not that at all. It's just I think it's the correct and intelligent decision to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can even call it a decision, really. Like, if I asked you to start believing in leprechauns right now, you're not going to just do it. Like, you're not going to just decide to believe in something. You have to be convinced, and you have to have a compelling reason, and don't have one.
Sure. So, so when you said you like basic was your first religious experience, I'm kind of because, I mean, I guess I never, I'm not, I guess I wasn't really familiar with like the level of religious component that's in basic training. Like what would you describe that as?
Well, the program that I attended was, as far as I know, has been discontinued, which is good.
Okay,
but that's not to say it hasn't been replaced with something else, which it likely has been.
Sure.
But really, a funny thing about it is, in basic training, that was one of the few things where they couldn't mess with you, or at least that's one of the urban legends. Like, they can't mess with your last name. You know, they can't do that. They can't physically assault you. But then they also had to make sure you had time for worship. That was one of the few privileges you had. And if you were to read a book or take any kind of literature, it had to be a religious literature. So when it came to Sundays, it was like, you can either stay here in the barracks and clean, or you can go out to the church and maybe get some cookies and punch and not be here for an hour and a half. So literally everybody went to some church service, and we just found the one that had the cutest girls and had the most cookies, and that's the one we attended, and that's how that went down.
I mean, that's usually the reason why people go to church, anyways, right?
But that was my first real religious attendance. I had no idea what I was doing. It was a Lutheran one. I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea what the things we were doing entailed. I just knew that at the end of it, I got cookies. And it was this particular service was really far away from where we happened to be in basic training in our barracks. So we had the longest walk back. So that's all that time without a drill sergeant, so it was just great. Everybody else was back and stuck in the barracks after an hour and a half. And we had to go 2 hours because we had to walk all the way down, and then we had to get food. So good choice, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of funny because, like, it wasn't required, quote unquote, but like they give you enough incentive. It's like, damn, that's kind of fucked up.
That first week, some folks stayed back and they're like, "What'd you guys do?" We cleaned. Well, next week you're gonna find. But I mean, we can talk about it later. But that's one of the reasons why I'm an atheist activist, because nobody should really be given that ultimatum. Really, you shouldn't be. I mean, it in hindsight, it can be kind of funny, but it's kind of messed up that folks are going to go and kind of escape having to do essentially punishment. Or go to church.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let me ask you this, like, it's not to get into, weeds of your basic too much, but like, I'm curious, like, of your like comrades, of your fellow, like, people, like, how many of them do you think were religious?
Ooh, I don't want to cop out. I was 17. I wasn't, and maybe I'm still not a super bright kid. So I don't know how my perceptions looking back, how accurate they would be. A lot of folks, I would say, were actually genuinely religious, I would say.
Okay.
But how much of that was for the same reasons I was going to that particular service, I couldn't say. I really couldn't say. But most people did seem to have some kind of religious bent to them. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of tracks with the whole culture of, military. And I mean, you surely meet people who are not of that. But I mean, most of the time you find that to be a correlation for sure, I would say. Well, okay, so let me ask you, you said you're the press officer, and I'm sure that, and for some background, people may not know this, I'm also an atheist, part of why I wanted to have you in here today. And, unlike you, I had a very religious upbringing. My parents are very strict Catholic. My mother actually is working her ranks up in the diocese as we speak. Very hardcore. So that's kind of a contrast, I should say. Contrast in our upbringings. So, and obviously we live in the Midwest, we live in Iowa, a very, stereotypically very religiously centered part of the country. And I'm sure you being the press officer, you've had your fair share of criticism, or, the organization as a whole. I'm just curious, like, what are some of your experiences with that, with dealing with that?
The biggest, and maybe folks who maybe listen to your podcast would be surprised to find out, isn't so much dislike of atheism or atheist groups. It's just the ignorance, just the genuine they don't know. They only know what somebody else told somebody else that told them, that their pastor told them. That's probably the biggest thing I run into. I remember explaining my organization to somebody once, and they're like, "Oh, so you guys actually don't worship Satan?" And it's like, no.
That's my favorite one.
But who told? Like, why? If we don't believe in God, why would we believe in Satan, right?
Yeah.
But for them, it doesn't register. They're told from a very young age that that's what an atheist is. And that's probably the biggest and to me strangest thing, because I feel like you think about that for 30 seconds and you can figure it out, but they clearly haven't. They haven't taken that 30 seconds for their 30 years of life to think about what it means. That is probably my weirdest thing running in with the public is explaining what it means.
Huh. And when you explain that, do you like, I mean, obviously there's plenty of different people, but have you experienced like any kind of animosity, like, oh, F you for being...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. We've gone to events. We went to the Republican straw poll years ago. There's what I consider to be somewhat of a terrorist organization, the Family Leader here in Central Iowa. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're...
what was that?
The Family Leader.
What religion? Like it's...
Oh, I couldn't tell you the specific denomination, but it's a hardcore fundamentalist Christian denomination.
Oh, okay.
They're big sponsors of the anti-LGBT bills. They speak out against that. Lots of, Christian nationalist stuff.
Sure.
Talk to those folks. I mean, it's just outright. I mean, to give you an idea, we went to the straw poll back in 2008, and we have a banner that says, it's just the first part of the First Amendment, the government shall make no laws respecting religion, has the text in there. And Republicans were like, oh, that's an awesome, like, yeah, first Constitution, yeah. And then they would see that it was Iowa Atheists or Freethinkers, the little logo at the corner, and they would switch. They would be like, oh, that's a good message. Oh, wait, you're atheist? Fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, why should it matter who's saying it if you believe in this, in the Constitution? So, yeah, they get triggered pretty easily.
Yes. I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that one.
Yeah, for sure. They very much, they get very triggered.
Yeah. Well, and, it's kind of, because, like, when, not to get into me personally, but, like, I think as a lot of people who make that transition into atheism from a religious, like, I started out as agnostic.
Sure.
And you kind of have, like, the whole sense where you're like, oh, like, maybe there's something, but then finally you just eventually get to a point where, like, yeah, like, and a lot of that comes from, the behavior of, Christians, like, like, as I have a lot of people that listen here and, have come through who identify as Christian. I don't have anything against them personally, but yeah, I mean, I resent the Christian church. I resent the Catholic Church. I would say in America, at least, it's the most like malicious religion. I think maybe some of those like Muslim type of religions also kind of have a, like in like Islam, severe lack of women's rights. I'm so against that. But yeah, I mean, religion as a whole has its set of problems for sure. But yeah, I mean, I will say I have like a particular disdain, and again, towards I like to think, Christians say, hate the sin, not the sinner. I think you can also say, hate the belief, not the believer. You know what I mean? Like, I don't view anybody negatively for being religious. I may think they're wrong. I may think they're incorrect. But I mean, obviously, if they are, being violent or being, acting a certain way, that's another thing in itself. So,
and this is just my point of view.
Sure.
I don't want to say my points of view represent Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers in total. But
no, sure, yeah.
I disagree slightly with that.
Okay.
Because, I mean, and I agree with most of what you said. There's a few things you said. First, let me tackle the agnostic atheist thing. Because this is another common misconception, I think. Most, like 95% of people who identify as agnostics are just atheists. Because remember, atheist means atheist, not theist. So if you have to choose... And, you either believe in God or you don't know. Well, don't know isn't a yes. That's still an atheist. Now, you may say, I'm an agnostic, I'm not sure. Okay, I mean, I appreciate that, but that's still an atheist position. It's just it has, for many people, a negative connotation to the word atheist, even though it's accurate for most people.
I see.
And I find that when folks say that they're agnostic and not atheist, they're trying to say, have you ever heard somebody say, like, oh, I'm a moderate, I'm in the middle? Yeah. Well, in some things that works, like, do you like chocolate or strawberry, or we'll settle on vanilla? Okay, well, I can't be kind of pregnant or kind of married, I'm either am or I'm not. So same thing with atheism, and I find it's a kind of a way for folks to drive a wedge and maybe not want to participate honestly in a conversation, in my experience.
Sure. I can understand that.
That's just how I see it. And then to your other point about not holding anything against religious folks, like I agree. I mean, it's not just somebody waking up every morning and deciding to believe in something that isn't real. It's a culture. It's something that they're grown up and they're raised in. But there is a point where I think someone has to take some, responsibility for what their faith does to other folks. A lot of people who are religious are genuinely better people than their religions would have them be. And they're held back from their belief in faith. Or believe in churches. If you're someone who's a member of a church who gives money to anti-gay or anti-education or something along those, something that you would personally disagree with, you have a responsibility to maybe not give them money and maybe not support that church. You don't get to choose to say, they don't speak for me when you consistently allow them to speak for you. And then the last point I'll make is kind of like that Christopher Hitchens quote. We all know what it was like when religion had all the power. They would come to your door with you at the end of a spear. Now that they don't have all the power, they come to you with their hat in hand and they're all gracious. But we should never forget what it was like when they had all the power, because that's what they want to do. Again, there's a lot of nice people there, but you let the religious folks take control, they're not going to have a hat in their hand anymore.
Sure. No, I mean,
we see it now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can agree with that point. Definitely. I guess my question would be, because I think a lot of that is lack of education, right? I mean, I don't like, I can definitely see your point for sure, but you also kind of have to have, in my opinion, you maybe have some level of sympathy for the fact that they, maybe they're just truly not bright. Like take racists, for instance. Like, I've never met an intelligent racist. Ever.
Fair. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah. So I guess I think of it more as a point of pity rather than I have some kind of disdain towards these people.
No, that makes sense to me. I can appreciate that, and I wouldn't say have disdain for people. People deserve respect. People deserve respect. Ideas deserve the amount of respect that they earn.
Sure.
That's very different. Mm-hmm. That's very different. So yeah, I get that, having some empathy and sympathy. I don't like saying that, especially as a press officer or someone who speaks to a lot of religious folks, because that for them, a lot of times they'll interpret that as they think I'm better than they. Like they think that I think I'm better than them, which isn't the case. I just don't believe in the same things. But like you say, like, never met an intelligent racist. If you should probably at some point have the "Are we the baddies?" moment, for a lot of these guys who you may not have been educated properly, or you've been miseducated on purpose to believe bad things.
Yeah,
you're still a functioning adult. And I guess here's the thing I was going to say: they vote, they get to drive a car, they get to have a job, and then they're bosses and landlords and stuff like that. So even if there's all the sympathy in the world for somebody who believes silly or racist things, if they control other people's livelihoods, how much sympathy does that matter when they can really hurt people?
Sure. So let me ask you this: what would you say to a religious person? Let's say, I mean, because I don't think atheists are really in the business of trying to convert people. I mean, maybe you
depends
are.
on who. It depends on what they're doing. Yeah,
sure.
It's hard to have something built around not believing in something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. But I don't know, if you were to if somebody was to engage in a debate with you and be like, or why are you atheist? Or maybe say why do you think I'm wrong? What would you tell them?
Sure. I mean, I think the best question you can ask a religious person is honestly and heartfelt. Ask them why. Why? I'm an atheist. Here's why I don't find any compelling evidence that gods exist. And we can go to the history of the Bible and what happened and all that. But if you turn that question to a religious person, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, well, I was just raised that way. Or I had some kind of tragic experience and this was the only thing or organization that helped me, which is, legitimately true for a lot of times. That doesn't make the stories true. But you can just ask why. Why this one? Why not that one?
Sure.
And I've never really, outside of scholars, I've never had a real good answer to that question that doesn't devolve into, political attacks or, yeah, exactly. Which, those are important too, but that's not really answering the question. And I think a lot of religious folks, intelligent religious folks, realize they don't really have a why that's comparable based on evidence. They have a why based on belief or culture, which is different.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of a tough one to like convince someone of, because like I was having this argument with my mother. She was, I was telling her like, yeah, I mean the same thing you're saying, like I don't see any compelling evidence, I don't. And she's like, well, but you can never prove religion because it's a belief. And I didn't say it, but I was like, well, that's the problem.
Yeah, it's like you just open the door and now step through.
Yeah. So I guess let me ask you this: do you think how much of it do you think is like your upbringing versus you're just that kind of person?
I mean, I think there is going to be a certain subsection that's of folks who are going to be susceptible to any kind of grift or idea or thing, and they can be varying levels of harm or good, and then goes anyway all the way from people who are bronies all the way to religious fanatics, all the way to people who are hardcore sports people. It that runs the gamut. But I don't think I'm particularly positioned to be an atheist any more than anyone else. I think it's just, I think maybe the biggest bonus I've had is I didn't have a whole bunch of the baggage of being raised religious. So that when I first really approached it as a young adult, I was able to take a little bit more of an outside looking in view and a more of an academic look at it rather than being ensconced in it. And I think that might be a bit of a benefit for someone like me. But you tell this to the next religious person, you think there's tens of thousands of gods out there. What's the likelihood that you landed on the right one the first time? The person who's a Muslim is going to say the exact same thing to you that you were going to say to them. And I'm just saying neither one of you are right. I go one God further and say yours doesn't exist either. And religious folks, anybody can get to that. I think most people get that concept.
Yeah. Like we said, it's just kind of crossing that bridge. I think it's comfortability too.
Sure.
It's I was talking about this today with my therapist. There's an old study that they did where they took like a group of like 100 people. And I don't remember exactly what the question, but I think it was something simple like 2 + 2 = 4. And they took a small number of people and told them to convince the rest of the crowd that the answer was 5. And by the end of it, majority of the crowd said that it was 5.
That's crazy.
There's something I think psychologically to that.
Well, it's culture. I mean, for a lot of folks, it's not just a decision to not believe in something. There's people who, if they came out and said they questioned faith, they would lose jobs, housing, family members, opportunities, and that's awful. But it's real. Think of it this way: there's $1 billion industry on buying, what are they? The faith healing waters and stuff like that. Stuff that even
I didn't know that $1 billion industry.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Like psychics, holy waters, all that stuff. I mean, the money is real, obviously. The people make the money, but I mean, there's something to it. Enough people are convinced of these obviously false things that they spend millions and billions of dollars on it. We can't just wave it off as they're all stupid. They're not. There's something that gets people going on this kind of thing.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question kind of on that point. What do you see that trajectory changing with advances in technology and more like intellectual thought and conversation? Do you see any trajectory where atheism will be more of a not power structure, but like more of a prominent idea? Or do you think that we'll always have that religious thing?
How do I want to put this? Yes and no. I think the fastest growing demographic in the United States right now are the nuns, people who claim no religious affiliation. There's more people. Yeah, no,
I thought you meant
None.
I was like, wow, I haven't heard that.
But if you think about it, there's more people who identify under nuns like that, None, than there are certain like Christian sects and Catholic sects. And I think there's more nuns now than Jews in the country, but there's way less representation across all stratas of power of the nuns than Christians. I mean, look at our Congress. There's, I think, 8 that are out and out non-religious, not necessarily atheists, but non-religious. But 30% of the country is non-religious. That's not a representative sample. So to answer your question, do I see it changing? I'm not sure, because I think more and more people will become less religious, and that is already the case. Already, people who are religious now, they throw out most of the core tenets of the faith for other things, for culture reasons. Okay. but I don't know if there will be more of a representation because, quite frankly, there's a political party in this country that has made making that not happen part of their platform. So until that's done with, I don't see it changing. Not to go directly into politics, but it matters. It matters when one political party is using one religious faith, one specific interpretation of one faith, to push their policies and demonize non-religious folks. It's going to be hard for atheism to become normalized because, as many atheists as there are, they're not billionaires sitting in Congress and sitting in judges and stuff like that. So time will tell, but we may not make it there with the way things go.
Sure. It's interesting you talk about politics because that leads into my next next question. Because, like I said, I identify as an atheist. However, I am kind of critical of this aspect of the atheist communities. I find that a lot of people who are atheists, they take that energy that would be religion, they gear into politics. Like, for instance, if you go to any atheist Facebook or Reddit group, it's entirely politics based.
Sure.
Almost all the time. So I don't know. I guess what are your thoughts on? Because and I don't agree with this assertion, but that will be like a lot of the Christians will make that argument. They'll make the argument that people are becoming this politically ideologically intense because of the lack of religion. I don't know. What's your thought about that?
Well, I think politics is really the exercise of power, whether it be economic, cultural, or otherwise, or legal. So if you're a group that is consistently on the outside of that power, regardless of what you are, I think you're going to see more energy into that. You see that with Stonewall and the gay rights movement. You saw that with the civil rights movement and the women's march and all that. So if everybody sat at home and played Xbox all day, there's probably less problems for Christians, or whatever group. So sure, I think that's probably true. But I think it's, regardless of what you think about other things, whether economics and all that, I don't think you can deny that Christianity is the main driver for a lot of the most unpopular actions that our government takes.
Sure.
Regardless of what party you're in and regardless whether you agree with it or not. So I think to ignore that in favor of some kind of go along to get along, I think is missing the point. And I think that's something that a Christian who sees themselves as a privileged privileged position of power would say to get somebody else to kind of shut up.
Sure. I guess to counter that though, there are major Democratic leaders who are Christian as well.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's Catholic, so it's a problem. Yeah.
You're not wrong. And Democrats aren't great either. But again, regardless of your political views on things in the Democratic Party, they're not Christian nationalists. You know what I mean? They're not the baddies necessarily in this particular arena. You're not going to go to a Democratic meeting and be required to pray the way you would in a Republican one. You won't go to a Democratic one and be kicked out of an office or chairmanship for being an atheist, where you would be in a Republican one. So those aren't really apples to apples when you compare that thing. So yeah,
sure. I would say though, I think you find a lot of like with the social media censorship I think it's fair to say that as a very liberal minded movement, like the mass censorship on media, whether it's for whatever reason. I guess so. I wonder if that maybe mirrors the religious. I guess that's kind of my point. Do you think that people who, subscribe as atheists, maybe still lack that nuance when it comes to politics? Maybe they just align left wing automatically because there's this strong right hold.
I think that's a big part of it. I think is true. I think there's a lot of folks who align Democrat do so because they see the religious stuff on the Republican side, not because they love Democrats. I think that is 1,000% true.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of atheists who would like to have Republican policies on taxes and stuff like that, but can't justify it because of the religious stuff And I mean, then that goes the other way too. There's a lot of Christians who would otherwise identify with the Democrats who support Republicans because of the abortion questions and trans panic and all the other moral panics and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it goes both ways. I think that's true.
Sure. Let me ask you this, because you're speaking about like the anti-LGBTQ stuff, which I mean, for the majority of part, I disagree with. I will say the one credible point against is like the pornography. Like there are cases of teachers showing pornography to children, so I guess that kind of goes back to the nuance thing. Like, do you see that? I mean, I guess I'm kind of just asking the same question, but like, because again, like there's this ideology, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but there's I think as atheists, I mean, you would agree as atheists, your organization, Atheists and Freethinkers, like we're supposed to be open-minded and have some nuance. So I mean, can you see there maybe being potential problems with that?
So yeah, because I think we need to define things a bit better on that, because I'm not familiar with any examples of teachers showing pornography. But even if I were, pornography is technically subjective, right? Now, we can go and purchase pornography. It's like, okay, this is clearly porn. But if it's an anatomical drawing, some people might consider that porn. Just, like the anatomical pose, with the hands down and just a nude body. Some people would consider that porn, and you have to recognize that. But the main thing, I guess, issue I would take with that is tying LGBTQ rights to pornography. It's like sexualizing LGBTQ rights, which I don't think is correct. I don't think that's a good connection to make. Because if a teacher is showing pornography in school, I don't know what that has to do with gay rights.
Well, it's it's in the conversation of it. It's when they're talking about trans or I don't have any images to pull up or anything, but I have seen examples where they have school books when it's like kids, and they have penises and they're doing things with their genitals, like
simulating intercourse or something like that.
It's kind of, yeah. I mean, so the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, that was a big basis of that. Was DeSantis, they heard about this and they wanted to get rid of this, and then they kind of stupidly labeled it as a Don't Say Gay bill, and that kind of caused a whole uproar. So I don't know.
I don't know what that bill says specifically, because I know one of the things they said, like the safe space thing, and it has the pride flag. Like, no, they had to get rid of that. I don't know what that's about. Do you know what that's about?
What they wanted to do that for the bill? Is what you're saying?
The bill went into effect, and then the teachers had to do that. They had to take away anything referencing the pride flag.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's fucked up.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of like. So because there's a picture in a book, now we have to attack gay people. I don't understand.
No, and look, and I can see your point. How that and this is what's bad about the religious aspect is it does the same, like it almost mirrors it, like it paints this one aspect as being this whole circumferencing it. I don't agree with that.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that, because I don't think if we didn't have religious nonsense given equal weight to evidence, I don't think this would even be a conversation. I don't think it would even be something that people are worried about. I think when you say there's simulated intercourse in a book or pornography or images that aren't acceptable, the entire panic around that is from religious people. It is. It really is. And if we wanted to have a serious discussion about what should or shouldn't be in a book, we can't have it because of the Christians. In my point of view, if we wanted to bring in some experts and some teachers and parents, we can't, because the religious people are and have been throwing a fit about it, and it just gunks up the works. And if there was a thesis statement about religion in the country, it just gunks up the works. It blocks all conversation. It does, because you can't reason with someone who thinks that they have the creator of the universe on their side telling you that you're evil, when it's like, well, what about the study? No, I don't care about the study. I care about what the Bible says. Well, conversation's kind of over.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's the essential difference between religious people and not religious people, is like, and maybe you disagree with this, but I like to think as an atheist, if there was evidence to support a God, atheists would be way more likely to acknowledge that versus if it was the other way around.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of like the famous big debates that have gone on over the years, several times it's been posed to the religious advocate, like, what would change your mind about religion? And they'll say about God, and they'll say nothing.
Yeah,
they do. They'll just say nothing because I believe it so strongly. There's nothing that could sway me. And it's like at that point, you're just like, what's the point? And like to your point about bringing up DeSantis and all that, those are the guys we're debating with. Folks who even if you could show them data and examples and bring people up, they don't care. It's what their faith says or what their donors.
Well, that's the real thing, right? And to my next point, you mentioned Christopher Hitchens earlier, and I've actually I've been reading God's Not Great, and it's interesting though, because I will say I don't agree with him near as much as I thought I would on some issues. For instance, I think he conflates 9/11 as like a religious fueled thing, which I mean, it could have been part of it, but I think the real reason is the U.S. intervened in the Middle East and they retaliated. I think that's a pretty
I think to his point, and it's been years since I read it.
Sure,
but my takeaway is yes, it's not just they flew them into the towers because they are Muslims and they hate Christians. No,
well, he kind of made that point in the book, though.
I think the point that I would make, and I think he might have made, but he also, I mean, you're reading it, so I'll take your word for it. Those people wouldn't have.
I haven't finished it either, so
those people wouldn't have done it if not for religion, meaning you wouldn't have been able to convince them to do it if there wasn't a religious faith. Like you can have all these other justifications to do a thing, to learn how to fly a plane and do this, but they wouldn't commit suicide unless they genuinely thought that they were going to heaven. And I think that is true. I think that aspect of it is true. All the other planning and the political reasons, yes. But those, however many guys, 11 guys, 7 guys? Yeah, those, that I think is true. Just, I mean, to bring it a little closer to home, like attacking abortion doctors, murdering abortion doctors, shooting up schools and shit like that. It's because they have a religious conviction. It's not like in the Bible it says to do this stuff or in the Quran it says to do this stuff. But you get that religious conviction and you have good people doing bad things.
I see your point for sure. So here's kind of tangent on, or to deviate on that. I consider myself a libertarian politically. And this is kind of in a conundrum I've been experiencing for a while, but especially in the last couple of weeks with, reading this book and both listening to, libertarian minded people I think libertarians in a way mirror the mindset of atheists in terms of like they are for the most part open-minded. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of religious people that are libertarians. And libertarianism, for those who don't know, it's basically the belief in the non-aggression principle. There's an anarcho aspect of it that is complete lack of government, which I don't subscribe to, but I do believe in diminishing government, small government. I don't think we should have a federal government, in my opinion. So I guess that's kind of a dichotomy that I've realized is like, and you see all these religious speakers. Christopher Hitchens, he's a self-proclaimed Marxist. Sam Harris, he's been a sympathizer of like the Iraqi war and statist type of things. But on the same side, there's the libertarian, a lot of libertarian people who are very religious. So I kind of find myself in this like middle ground where it's like I don't agree with the statism and I also don't agree with the religion. Sure. I kind of feel like I'm in the middle. You know what I mean? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not a libertarian.
Sure. I kind of picked up on that.
I think the libertarian arguments fail on their own merits, regardless of religiosity. So I feel confident in saying I'm not a libertarian, but I understand what you're saying because you're right. I know a lot of atheist libertarians, and I think a lot of the atheist libertarians that I know of, and maybe you're similar, is it's really the religious overreach of the government that really rankles the libertarians who just want smaller government, no taxes, stuff like that. They want to be left alone, and okay, I can respect that argument, and you'll see a lot of atheists go against the Republican Party because they don't like the stuff I said earlier, their religious stuff, but they like the tax policy. I get it. I can discuss that. But I don't know. I don't know if there's really a good answer for that, for an atheist, conservative-ish type person, because our shitty political system doesn't make room for you, and it doesn't really make room for me either.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have an answer for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think the belief of libertarianism is that they want that gone. I mean, that shitty political system that you're talking about.
Yes, I absolutely. I think that is true. Yeah, and I think that's why there's libertarians and not more Republicans.
Sure.
I understand that. I just don't know what the solution is, because anywhere you go, you're not going to be happy.
That's true. That's true. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of an interesting conundrum, but I will say ultimately, like back to that criticism of how atheists kind of delve in politics. I will say I do think that's still a better conversation than a religious conversation.
Oh yeah.
Because even if you are politically bent, you're at least having a conversation about something that's really happening. Yes. I think that's important.
Yeah. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something along the lines of one of the main reasons, the speaker vote failed like 15 times or some stupid shit and all that.
Oh, yeah. I kind of heard about that.
Yeah. But the reason for a lot of the dysfunction that we have in the state and federal government is, you could even point it as explicitly religious, because they couldn't agree on things because the religious folks really want their religious dogma to become law. And you have some other folks like who maybe be libertarian or centrist or something like that. They don't want that. And there's enough religious influence in the government that you could make the argument that if we just had more atheists in government, regardless of their political views, it would just work better, because at least they're going to be talking about things based on evidence and data, and we can go back and forth. We're not working off of divine commands. Religious people can't do that, and that just breaks everything down. So I'm not going to say if everybody became an atheist, the world will immediately become a better place like sunshine and rainbows. But I think you can actually, you would see a lot less bullshit, just because so much of the bullshit we see now is specifically from religion.
Is an interesting point. Let me ask you this. Let me play devil's advocate a little bit. A libertarian favorite. Not to play on the devil part too much. No.
Highly offensive.
So you're press officer for the Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers, which is an organization. And atheism is defined as lack of a theism. Do you wonder if there's maybe a contradiction in the idea that you have an organization for something that is not religion?
No, not at all. I mean, not any more than I would see a chess club or a pickleball club or a card club. It's an area for a bunch of like-minded folks to do things, socialize and entertain, and just kind of have community and camaraderie.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can see that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of just going into my previous point with the politics and stuff.
It's a fair question, because it's actually something I've been asked by a lot of religious folks. Is they say, "Oh, you don't like church, you don't like religion. Well, then why do you have a meeting?" Or something like that. And it's just like they conflate churches with community, and their church is their community, but they think that you can't have community without church. Like they legitimately, like, let me ask you a question. Have you ever told somebody that you're an atheist and then they told you that you don't really love your kids or your wife or your mom? Have you?
No, I've never had that.
I've had that happen a lot.
Wow.
A lot. Because they can't imagine somebody who doesn't believe the same things they do can believe in good things that they agree with. So they have to otherize you in some way. Really, truly. Like, you don't really love your wife because you don't know God's love or don't know Jesus' love. It's like, fucking excuse me? Like you telling me that I don't know what it's like to love my wife or my kids or enjoy doing things or not doing things? And no, they cannot. Like, they're not being mean. They genuinely can't see it. And that's really messed up. It really is. No.
I agree.
Sad.
Yeah, no. And and that, like, I can agree with that, because I remember I went to a because I grew up in like a small town, super religious, and I had some friends from high school that got married. And I remember watching the ceremony, and the entire time there seemed to be such an obsession with, like, you're getting married and you're also getting married to God. Like, there's such an emphasis on, like, there's a God in the marriage. And I have always just resented that. Like, no.
Right? I agree. Even if you're religious, just like, I don't think I need Jesus's consent to have sex with my wife after I get married to her. Like, come on. Like,
yeah.
But some people genuinely do. You know, you've seen the meme, I don't consent, you know? I consent, I don't consent. Somebody like way over there. Like, we laugh, but that's how a lot of people think.
Yeah. It is really sad. And, you know, and like, here's a thing too. Like, you know, people that, let's say, like, they have a drug addiction and they get better. Like, you hear a lot of times that it's because of a religious institution. And that will be like a point to them. Like, oh, this is good. But I always make the argument, like, why can't you just have a secular organization that does the same thing, that offers them help, offers them a community, offers them like therapy in a way that, you know, way for them to be helped that's maybe not, you know, religious.
Yeah.
Just have them observe their life and be like, hey, you know, how is your heroin use negatively affecting your life?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what you said there. Yeah, there's no need for religion, but I think it's very telling that when religions need new converts, that's who they go for. They go for people who are genuinely suffering or struggling. And hey, I have a ready-made victim mentality right here in a book for you. It's very telling, because you don't see, you know, very well-to-do organizations running out there and trying to do that. Not to say that they shouldn't, but they're only going after folks who are down so that they can give them a hand up. They're not going to anybody who's already standing up on their own, generally. Also, to bring it back to politics a little bit.
Sure.
There are programs. I know Recovering from Religion, I think, does have one. Freedom from Religion Foundation also has a hotline and organizations to help for addiction recovery. There are secular groups out there.
Oh, cool.
Which is cool. And the thing is, they've been out there for a long time. In the state of New York, there was a bill that was, it was actually, I think, passed by both houses to make sure that when people are going through addiction treatment after, you know, through the judicial system and the criminal justice system, like they can go through AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and all the other things that are faith-based. Well, there were secular ones too, and they're just like, hey, we need to add these to the list because they've been accredited, they've been around for 15 years. Why aren't they on the list? Put them on there. The New York Constitution says that we have to because everybody has to be treated equally. The governor vetoed it and wouldn't say why. Why would you intentionally leave off secular recovery programs to people who are through the criminal justice system? What is the reason for that? And there isn't a good one other than I want only religious recovery things. That's part of why I say atheism is going to struggle, because you have people in power like that who are intentionally blocking out secular avenues to recovery. That's just one small example.
Sure, I could see that. Going back to, like, you know, kind of the convert type thing. Have you heard any kind of, like, you know, inspiring stories, or any, maybe not even inspiring, like just interesting stories of people who have started from a religious, that you've met through your organization, that have started in a religious background and have, like, you know, converted to atheism in a sense?
Oh, yeah, a lot of people, most people that are atheists in America are probably at one point religious, but absolutely, I know. Both locally and nationally, there was one of my role models. His name was Dr. Hector Avalos. He was a professor up at Iowa State for years. He grew up poor in Mexico and became a faith healer and believes in all that stuff. And he really wanted to become a pastor and a preacher. And he would do I think he did the snake handling and all the stuff, you know. But he learned how to read in the original Greek, and he went to school for all this stuff at the University of Arizona, and I think in Mexico, and then here at Iowa State, and became a huge atheist just from reading the Bible. I think that's a very compelling story. Just being able to learn and seeing how it didn't match up with reality, and how all the folks that he thought were his friends, they really just wanted him to convert more people that didn't really care about him, is something I remember him saying. There's Dan Barker, the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He used to be a pastor and go about doing the gospel and all that, and he became an atheist after realizing that he felt like he was lying to everybody for economic gain, and now he's an excellent guy. He's a good guy. So yes, I've seen a lot of folks who were religious, and then and here's I think the key that a lot of religious folks I think are missing. They didn't become less religious by stopping questioning. They became less religious by asking questions. Something that I always encourage the religious folks to do. It's never the other way around. They didn't meet some magic person or mystical event that just changed their life. No, they just read the damn book and they thought about it.
That's always what I say to religious people too. It's I'll tell them, I'm not even trying to convince you to be an atheist. But like, ask yourself questions. Like, challenge yourself. I think anyone should challenge. And honestly, you probably disagree with this too, but like, even if you challenge yourself and you still become a Christian, I think that's better than the person who just blindly takes everything on. At least you're working towards something. At least you're putting in the thought experiment.
I mean, I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, at least be able to justify why you think what you think in some aspects, Yeah.
For sure. This is a fun one for you, probably. What do you say to people who say atheists have no morality?
I asked, here's what I'll say is like, how many people, if there was no God tomorrow, religious person, how many people would you go out and kill and rape and murder tomorrow? Is it 0? Is it as many as you want? Because it's as many as I want. That also happens to be 0. The idea that you can't be moral without Christianity is ridiculous. We wouldn't be here if that were true. Ask them to think about that. If you needed Christianity to be a moral person, to have community, to love your family, to take care of your kids and guard your community and have common interests, we wouldn't have got out of the Stone Age. Really, we really wouldn't have as a species. But clearly there was a time before Christianity, and then there's a time after Christianity. And I think that kind of proves that you don't need Christianity to exist. It's just to say you can't be moral with being an atheist just shows, I think, a profound lack of understanding of what morality is and what it means to be a human being.
I would agree. So we've been talking, we've been ragging on Christianity, which is fine. Sure. I'm totally okay with that. But I guess I'm curious because, obviously it's not the only religion in the world. And I guess I'm not even necessarily asking you to like rank, but like, okay, like for instance, like Buddhists.
Sure.
Like I think, and I could be wrong on this, but from what I understand, Buddhists, it tends to be more of a personal religion. There's not really as far as I know, there's no doctrine in Buddhism that says, I need to spread the word of God. I need to convert people. Sure. It's more of a personal religion. I don't know. Do you think there are religions that are more, more beneficial to focus on or that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, a lot of the focus is, to be fair, the bugbear is Christianity. In America, it's what it's what touches our life. So when I hear that criticism, it's like, well, I don't see the Buddhists coming in trying to start up, take my kids to their school. Yeah. So no, I think that there's plenty of religions and faith ideas that have varying levels of harm and varying levels of good. If all Christians behaved like Buddhists do, maybe there wouldn't be this many problems. But maybe the Buddhists only behave that way because there's so many Christians. I don't know. So it's really a question that we can't answer. We can only answer what we see, which is that the Christians are kind of the baddies in this scenario, in the realm of what's real and what's not and how it impacts us. But yeah, I mean, Buddhism seems to be I don't know a lot about the other religions. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I mean, Buddhism, the things I do know, it doesn't sound like it has any kind of imperative to go out and necessarily harm folks or convert them. No. So that's better than Christianity and the Abrahamic religions. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that your focus is against Christianity, which I would say mine is too. I mean, I don't take like I'm not taking like a flag and be like atheism and like trying to, but like if you were to ask me like what I think is the most harmful religion, I would say probably Christianity, and then I'll say Islam, just due to the fact that I mean, there are sects and there are people who argue against this, but I mean, if you look at the ancient texts and everything, it's pretty clear that lack of women's rights.
Oh yeah, that's like across the board. And it's a unique, not so unique aspect of all these Abrahamic religions is women always tend to get the short end of the stick. That should raise questions for anybody who values all of humanity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see that in Christianity too. There's a very obvious, hierarchy. A contrast between men and women. Like the women get the short end of the stick for sure.
Yeah. But I still think, the fundamental thing for myself is faith as an idea isn't good. It's not a virtue. And it's taught or spoken of in our culture as if it is. And I think that's a problem. So whether it's Buddhists or Hindu or Christian or Islam, faith, meaning believing in things without evidence, or oftentimes intentionally because there's no evidence, is an inherently bad way to find things out about the world. It's bad epistemology. So if we had to rank it, yeah, sure, there's some that's better than others, but faith inherently is not a good thing, and we should avoid it whenever we can.
I agree. I have one last question for you. What do you think about the concept of good and evil? Do you think it exists? Do you think it's because I personally, I tend to find that, because there's no absolute of either. There's no Satan and God. So like, I think it's more of for most people, it's more of a middle ground. They have malicious aspects to them. They have positive aspects to them. So I don't know, I guess what's your idea with the thought of good versus evil? If somebody says something's evil or good, or I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I consider myself a humanist, right? So, I mean, I think there are things that we can say are as close to objective as we can be, objectively good and objectively bad, meaning unnecessary suffering is universally bad by virtue of being unnecessary and suffering. So no, there's not some perfect good or some perfect evil, but we can measure what things are good and evil, or more good or more evil than others. A lot of that revolves around, what does it mean to be a human? What increases human flourishing, for everybody, not just the people we like, or not just the people that look like us, because we're all humans. That's the key core tenet there. So yeah, there can be things that are good and evil, and oftentimes injecting faith into that, injecting unproven claims into that as if they were always true, completely torpedoes that. It completely torpedoes your ability to find out what really is good or what really is bad. Let me give you an example, if I could.
Yeah.
Cannabis, right? Cannabis. I think this is such a good example of this, where
we promote it.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I didn't know that. But I mean, just the law surrounding it, regardless of whether you like it or not. Just look at on paper, the impacts of cannabis and the effects and what it does, and see how it's treated, particularly by religious people. And then you put that up against something like alcohol that is legal, accepted, marketed, branded, part of religious ceremonies. Well, they're religious ceremonies a lot of times. And you put them up side by side, and you can see cannabis is just so much less harmful. So it's a drug. It's still a drug. But it's so much less harmful. But look at the hoops that people are willing to jump through. I don't think any rational person who's interested in this flourishing of humanity would ever do these kinds of laws against cannabis and then be okay with alcohol. And I think that is, if you want to talk to a religious person about how their faith clouds their ability to think, bring up cannabis, because the gut reaction is going to be, oh, it's bad, stoners, pot, etc. I'm telling you, man, there are people who have been using this drug forever, and nobody's ever gone into a rage on cannabis and driven their car into a crowd. But I can tell you, we can Google it right now, and there's going to be 10 people who died in an alcohol-related incident in the last hour and a half. So, but I mean, I think it seems, as small potatoes and silly, I think, for a lot of folks, but really it's low stakes for a lot of folks, and their faith in their usually conservative mindset that all drugs are bad clouds their ability to think rationally. That's such a good example. And I think you'll probably find you're going to find a lot more converts in being pro cannabis than you will being atheist, because it's the same arguments. Is it bad? Who's it hurting? Who's it hurting? If you drink a beer at home, is it hurting anybody? No, it's fine. If somebody smokes a blunt at home, is it hurting anybody? I guess not. Yeah, and then you can extrapolate it out to other things like, same-sex rights and women's rights.
Yeah. Well, and going back to libertarianism, I mean, that's kind of a point that, I think there should be no government intervention on the substance that you put in your body, in my opinion. And the fact that, I mean, that's such a classic thing to just be like, the stoner. And I mean, it goes back to like the whole, it mirrors that. It mirrors. I think
it's a really good mirror. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, man. Shit, I don't really have anything else to talk about, man. This has been a fucking great conversation. I've loved this.
I'm here all night, so if you have any other questions, you throw them at me.
Wait, I did have one thing. I can't think of it. Well, here, I'll say this. I was going to mention this. So I'm currently doing a month of sobriety.
I didn't know that. Jeez.
Hey, it's fine, man. I look. I have no problem with anybody using. You do what you want. But going back to the alcohol thing, I have honestly kind of been thinking about not drinking.
Sure.
Because the fact that you can say any drug is bad, and it's always funny because the people who are most against that, they almost always have a beer in their hand. Don't you notice while they're talking about it, they are drinking literally, and you're like,
we're at a bar. We're at a bar. We're at a club or a party.
Oh, I'm fun to drive. It's hilarious, dude. It's fucking crazy. I also wanted to say, I've hit up multiple other religious organizations and none of them got back to me. You're the only one that's reached out to, which, is, you would expect that. But, the fact that you're here and willing to talk, that says a lot. So I really appreciate that.
No, I'm glad to. One, I should do it as the press officer, otherwise I shouldn't do the thing. But no, I think it's important to normalize atheism because everybody's an atheist. I just go one God further. And so do you. A lot of times, back to your original point, they see it as being a political thing. Like, he's just making waves. It's like, there's going to be a time where something is passed or something is done that you're just not going to like, whether it's small or whether it's large, whether it's making you wait to eat your food at the company picnic because they make you say a prayer, or because they want your kid to go and become and say a prayer at school because of some new law. There's different levels of this. And if you see it as flippant or silly or political or other to take these issues of church and state separation, to not take them seriously, I would really encourage you to wake up on that. Because if you're a libertarian, if you are progressive, and even if you're a conservative, world's not going to look good for folks like you if religious folks keep getting their way and you stay silent when religious ideology is put into law. Because we've already seen it happen at the Supreme Court. We're seeing it happen in our state. Being silent as folks' rights are being taken away and rolled back just because they don't affect you, it's going to one day. And is this the place you want your kids or your grandkids to live in? It's not mine.
Sure. I will counter that. I counter that point, I guess. Like, do you think it's possible to even, because this is kind of the libertarian argument, right? Is like they have so much power that regardless of how you vote, they're going to continue to have the power.
No, I actually don't think so. But a lot of that will have to be, abolishing capitalism, which we can talk about if you like. But
you and I aren't friends.
Well, no, and I know that's a big sticking point for libertarians. But I think for a libertarian, if you're worried about that entrenched power structure and how voting doesn't matter, it is because of the entrenchment of capital. Now, whether you like capitalism or not, you have to take steps to defang the big players in this. So part of that is voting. I think voting does have some value, particularly at the local level, especially at the local level. Did you vote in the last city council elections and all that crap?
Not the city council. I did vote for the midterms.
Midterms, yeah. You saw how some of the differences were. It was like just double digits. It wasn't a lot of people won by big margins. They won by like 20 or 30 votes. It matters.
That was, was really surprising because they were predicting that red wave and it just didn't really happen.
Yeah, right. And a lot of it was because of small margins. And in Iowa, it went red because I have thoughts, which I'm more than happy to talk to you about. But it matters to vote. And I think if you get it at the local level, if you start building those coalitions locally and get people in who have been historically disenfranchised, in particular, people of color, women, and people who aren't rich, I think you will start to see change. It's slow and it takes a long time. But if you want the big change so that these conversations were not being held back talking about 1950s era laws that women have to cover their arms and shit like that, that's going to mean in getting rid of a lot of the entrenched capital, and that's slow and painful.
Sure. I hate to stay on this political point, but I guess the libertarian argument would be that if you have a free market, that is like the true voice of the people. Mm-hmm. Say, for instance, Walmart tomorrow is like, hey, we're not allowing black people in our store, which would be a terrible business model for Walmart. But like, you and I would both say, hey, we're not going to shop at Walmart anymore. I guess, the libertarian argument is that the reason that that there is this entrenched capital is because of government has this stronghold, because they impose these tax laws and these things. Now, I do think, because I'm not an anarchist, I do think that there is a argument for the power vacuum. I do think, like, let's say tomorrow we had a libertarian society or an anarcho-capitalist society. There are going to be these players that still have an enormous amount of capital. And that is that's something as an atheist, or not atheist, as a libertarian, I do have conundrum with, for sure. But I guess that would be kind of my counter argument. And, kind of going back to Christopher Hitchens, he was, that was kind of one of the points I really disagree with them on, is he's like a very big Marxist, communist socialist type of guy. So I don't know, I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm not a Marxist. I think Marx was very correct in his diagnosis of the problems of capitalism. I don't think he's wrong there. I think his solutions are not good in a lot of ways. But I think the diagnosis of the problems of capitalism, I think, have very much proven him to be right on that. In regards to, like, particularly in a place like Walmart, if Walmart were to do that tomorrow, sure, we could all speak with our dollar, but not everybody has the privilege and the luxury to do that. What about the people who work there? They don't get a say on what Walmart's policies are towards black people. So now they have to work for a company that hates black people or just go hungry.
Well, they could quit and find another job.
Somebody has to do the jobs, so Walmart goes under because everybody quits. Cool. What happens in the meantime? What happens to all the supply chains, the warehouses, the transportation, the manufacturing, all these other things that go to get those products on the shelves? This isn't just those people deciding to quit a job. It's like, hey, trucker, are you going to go through your whole entire truck and make sure none of them are Walmart goods? You don't get to pick what's in your truck. You're an independent contractor. No, I don't think that's really feasible logistically. Hey, train yard, no Walmart trucks here because we don't like racism. Okay, so now we're going to look at every car we have and then divert and change our train yard. It's not feasible, and I don't think it's workable, and I don't think it's something that is best addressed with the free market. I think if we care about other folks, a government has to enforce it. And I think historically that's always been the case. To your other point about how it's entrenched, though, you're right, though. It is entrenched because our government was set up by capitalists. It was set up by people who already had that entrenched wealth. It's no surprise that the laws favor entrenched wealth.
Sure.
So it's a catch-22. But I don't think picking and choosing with our dollars is a solution. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll let you talk.
Go for it.
Every time, literally every time, minority, and I don't mean just black folks, just minority ideas and businesses begin to get some traction, they get killed, robbed, murdered, or shut out in other ways, whether it be through state violence, private violence, etc. So it's not a good model to let the free market do it, in my view.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, and like I said, that speaks to the power vacuum argument. Like, I do think that there's some, I mean, I consider myself a minarchist. So that's just, okay. Focus is smaller government. There are things like, here's my biggest argument against an anarcho-capitalist society is that, what do you do with the children? Because the only purpose children serve in a market is sexual exploitation or slavery. Yeah, and neither of those things are okay. Yeah. So, I do think that there is a middle ground. I guess my counter to the anti-capitalist argument is that the flip side of that is so much worse. That would be my argument. I mean, you look at like Soviet Russia, for instance, where people are starving, eating their own children because they have put all their faith in this government and it fails them.
Well, I don't think that's really an accurate representation of what happened. But
what do you mean?
It wasn't where they had the faith in their government. It was an authoritarian regime that says you will have faith in us or we'll kill you.
Sure,
that's very different than them voting it in, which never happened.
Sure, but the one leads to another, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, you can look at places that have no government and places that have a ton of government, and you're going to see differing values of metrics of success or suffering depending on a ton of other values, metrics that aren't really determined specifically in a one-to-one with how much government they have. I mean, places with little to no government tend to be the least good places to live unless you're wealthy. And then the places with a ton of government tend to be the better places to live, even if you're not wealthy. So I don't think it's a fair correlation to say more government means more suffering, particularly with the Russian example, or the Soviet example, because Lysenkoism really, in my view, is probably responsible for most of the famine stuff more than a bad government. Like, it was stupid. Do you know what that is, right? Lysenkoism?
No, that part I'm not familiar with.
It's sad. They basically, this guy convinced all the leaders in the Russian government, in the Soviet government, that he could double and triple crop yields. All we had to do is we had to plant them not as deep, plant them closer together, and give them a little bit less water, and it'll be fine. Trust me, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine, and that directly led to the famine. On top of that, nobody wanted to send them money and food because they were, the big bad. So Soviet Russia starved, and yeah, that's awful. And they were authoritarian. They just rolled tanks in instead of dealing with people civilly. But I don't think that's an indictment of big government. I think that's an indictment of shitty science and shitty authoritarian thinking and faith and not checking the science. But I mean, you look at a place like, the Nordic countries, even like Germany, they have a huge government. Huge. It's a pretty good place to live. But then you look at places that don't have that. Not so great. Qatar, slavery to build the World Cup stuff because a few rich folks want to make money on a national stage. They don't have labor protections, they don't have minimum wage laws. Not a good place to work. So, not perfect, but I just don't think the corollary of more government means more suffering is necessarily accurate.
It's an interesting perspective. Let me ask you a fun question before something not so not so tragic. What is your favorite part of being the press officer for Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers?
Talking to religious folks. Sometimes, a lot of times you deal with folks that are just, belligerent or ignorant, but sometimes you get people who are genuinely curious. They genuinely want to ask questions. They want to engage. I had a back and forth with this woman from Southern Iowa for months where we're just asking questions back and forth. And I think, I don't think I changed her mind, but I think I gave her some different perspectives that maybe she had never considered. So that was really good. And I felt useful. I think that's probably the best part.
Awesome. Jason, this has truly been a pleasure. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people, I guess, how can people find out about your organization, participate, all that?
So iowaatheists.org, it's plural, iowaatheists.org. You can also just Google Iowa Atheists and Freethinkers. We're on Facebook. That's probably where we're most active right now. We have events going on. We do like some community projects and stuff like that. They're doing movie screenings. There was one tonight, but it got canceled because of the weather. Religulous.
Ooh, remember that? I love that. That's one of my favorite fucking.
They do like Cosmos and stuff like that. They partner with the Humanists a lot of times. There's always an Easter banquet we do for folks, and then like a winter solstice party and things like that. A few things I do want to bring up. If you are interested with Iowa Atheists, we do have Reason on the Hill coming up. And then we have the Keep Religion Out of Government Summit coming up. The Reason on the Hill is in February. And then the Church and State Separation Rally thing is in March. The exact dates are on Facebook and on the website. That's where you're going to get to talk to legislatures and explain why they should keep church and state separate. And then another big thing is going to be the Iowa Secular Summit, something that I'm working on with some other folks. It's going to be in June, and it's going to be a big talk about secular values and stuff like that.
I'll have to check those out, man. That's awesome. Hey, like I said, man, it's been a true pleasure having you in. I appreciate the open-minded conversation, and
always.
Yeah, it's been fucking awesome. Guys, like you said, go check us stuff out. Macau Stars Podcast. We're here every Monday and Tuesday at 7 p.m. We have a Patreon. We have a website, MacauStars.com. And yeah, check us out there. All right, guys. Have a good night.